Awesome. Okay, I'm going to dive in with a little bit of teaching to begin with, and then I really just want to open it up to some conversation, what questions you're having. My assumption is that most people who join these calls do have a background in basic things with NVC, so let's just set a little bit of a frame. We are talking today about powerful requests and what we mean by making requests through an NVC frame. And the main distinction that we work with is the difference between a request and a demand. So I'm just going to remind us a little bit about those two distinctions. So when we're in conversation with somebody and we are asking for what we want, which is kind of a loaded thing, because I'm going to have you, often what happens is we don't know what we want. And we begin with requests, asking for what we think we want. And ideally, through a dialogue, we then discover that the thing that we thought we want isn't actually the thing we do want. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a spiraling down process where we can get clearer and clearer in dialogue on what it is that we actually do want. So one thing we want to do when we're entering into an NVC-oriented dialogue is to check in with yourself about how open you are to yourself and others, and where your willingness to be changed is. So if I'm coming into a conversation with an agenda and I'm going to start making demands, I'm not that open to a broad range of things in you and me, and I don't have a lot of willingness to be changed when I come into that conversation, because I have something that I want and I'm attached to this thing that I want. If we're really going to be coming from interdependent consciousness, I've done some work ahead of time to figure out what needs I'm trying to meet. And I'm really, really grounded in the needs that I want to meet through the dialogue that I'm going to have with you and through the requests that I might make. But I hold my strategies very, very lightly. So I come in, I have ideas of what might help, and I often invite you into thinking together with me, co-creating with me, weighing in, and I come into dialogue with the assumption that we may come out on the other end with a completely different solution than what I had coming in. So being open to yourself and others, and having a willingness to be changed and to be able to flex and flow as you go through the conversation are some of the attitudinal pieces you want to bring in if you're really going to come from request energy. So request energy relies in large part on your willingness to hear a no and to continue to work with yourself and the other person, even if they're saying no to the thing that you're initially leading with. And to not hear a no as your invitation to now disconnect. So when you come in and you can work with a no by hearing what it is that they're saying yes to, and then joining there and working with them and yourself on that, we're closer in a request energy mode. All right, so first, I'm going to try and make this a little more clear. The first thing we want to check in with is the consciousness that we're bringing to the conversation. With demand consciousness, I have an agenda, there's something that I want changed, and I'm leading with some kind of urgency about something that we need to fix and how you're going to help me do that, usually by something you're going to change, okay? And we can lead in our demand with a lot of should language, must language, have to language. And when we're making these demands, whether they're explicit or implicit, we're still operating out of a power struggle. My job is to get power over you, to influence you, to sell something to you, to convince you of something. And I see you as the other who's either going to agree or disagree, work with me or against me. So we've got a lot of dualism that gets set up when we're approaching conversations from a demand frame. When we shift into request consciousness, we're coming in with a real grounding in what's deeply important to me. I'm aware of and I'm grounded in the needs that I'm hoping to meet. I am privileging the relationship over the transaction. I'm willing to re-examine what it is that I want and be influenced by what you say to me through the dialogue. And I'm willing to shift and be influenced I'm hoping you're willing to shift and be influenced, and I'm willing to shift and be influenced through the process of co-creation. And then request language is, if we're going to get very, very skillful in a classical NVC style around what request language would look like when we're practicing, is we're striving to stay in the present moment. So it's things that each of us could be saying and doing right now in the dialogue between one another. So it's present moment oriented. We keep our attention on very actionable ways of making requests. So we stay behavioral and we stay neutral. And we make it a practice to ask for what we do want instead of what we don't want. So instead of saying, you know, I want you to stop being so lazy, right? Which is not present moment actionable, behavioral, or positive, because I'm asking for what I don't want. I'm going after your sense of character. And it's not something that you can actually demonstrate in this moment. Instead of saying something like that, we'd come up with something concrete now. And you're going to ask me, of course, to come up with a script on the spot, and I can't. So I'm not going to go there. We can play with that in a moment if people would like to play with that in practice. So those are the pieces that I wanted to say about the characteristics of a request: action language, positive, doable, present moment. Also, when we're going to be skillful around the request part of the model, remember that you're always going for connection before correction, empathy before education, as Marshall would always say. And so we hold off on strategizing and solution finding until we've spent enough time and work establishing a quality of connection between two people, where both people trust that their needs matter. Hold on one moment. Somebody just came into my house. Nope. I'm not expecting anybody, but somebody's at my door. We're going to ignore them. All right, so we have empathy, connection. That's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? When you're sitting and you are not expecting anybody, and then there's somebody at your door. Okay, I'm going to take a moment and just sort of refocus, because I don't think there's really anybody there anymore. Let me think where I was at. It would be so much easier if you were all in the room with me right now, and then you could say, oh, thank you, Harry. Please repeat those two Marshallisms. That helps me get refocused. Marshall would say that we're always going for connection before correction. So you're establishing a connection between two people before you start going after what you'd like to have changed. And he would also say empathy before education. So you are going after the quality of both people's needs mattering, their feelings being honored, their felt sense being included in the space. You're really tending to that relational frame before you move to strategy or solution. And part of the reason for that is that you want two whole human beings who are open to a lot of data, not just old cultural strategies, to be in conversation and in dialogue, co-creating a new future or a new way of doing something. Because what we're often doing when we're making requests is we're trying to shift an old habitual pattern that we no longer enjoy, and we're inviting ourselves and other people into finding a new way of doing or approaching something. And Mickey Cashton has often called this a place where we have a crisis of imagination. And I love that phrase of a crisis of imagination, because the images in our minds are often what we don't want and what we've always done. And so that tends to filter into our language. And when we're going to really make powerful requests, we're drawing on a different part of our brains. We're drawing on the part of ourselves that is envisioning something that may not yet be happening. We're envisioning a way of being or a way of doing something or a habit that we're not living out of yet. And so we're imagining possibility. And ideally, we're imagining a possibility of a better world that works for more people. But you know, when you get to that place in a conflict where you're like, I just can't see how my needs can get met and your needs can get met. It feels like we have a conflict of needs. In those moments, Mickey would say we have a crisis of imagination, because we really want to slow down and begin imagining what would need to be different for both of our needs to get met. And that takes a lot of intentionality and effort. And when we have a quality of trust and connection that we both matter, and I'm going to bat for what is really important to me while simultaneously going to bat for what is really important to you, and you trust that I care about what you care about, it makes it much easier for us to move into a collaborative and co-creative frame. If I don't get the sense that you are holding in you what I'm caring about, it'll be easier for us to stay in demand consciousness, because I'm still going to bat for me and you're going to bat for you, and we're not sitting on the same side of the couch yet. So we want to be on the same side of the couch, working together to solve the problem out there. We don't want to see each other as the problem. And the more that we're in the you're the problem or I'm the problem, the less we're going to be in NVC consciousness. And the more that we can first do the relational work of getting all of us on this side of the couch and we together are looking at this problem that we have, the more likely it is that we're moving into interdependence, collaboration, connection. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so that's really what I wanted to remind us of as we start. What I want to hand back to you right now is what comes up in you around this. What questions are you having? Are there places where you're struggling? Are there some points that you'd like more clarity around? This is where I sort of turn it over to you and say, that's my 10 minutes. And now you bring in some content. So